Self-compassion, your inner BFF. If you struggle from a very loud inner critic that constantly has you doubt yourself, overthink, leaving you feeling exhausted and like nothing's good enough, it's time to befriend your inner critic and make them your best friend. In this video, I'm going to share with you how to change your relationship with your ego intellect so it doesn't end up in self-sabotage, self-doubt, and exhaustion, how we can anchor into the power of our spirit and the power of self-compassion that allows us to not only have more space for ourselves, but provide more intimacy in our relationships, more resilience, and more connection to our heart space, our intuition, and our guides. If a friend calls you or a loved one and they're going through something difficult, maybe they've made a mistake, maybe they're struggling in a relationship, do you answer the phone and tell them how terrible and awful that they are? Telling them that it's really their fault that they're in the situation that they're in? Probably not. When we have people who love us, who need support, often, especially as intuitive, empathic people, we are incredibly supportive and loving, nurturing, reminding them of their innate gifts and worthiness, and that mistakes are part of our journey instead of a mirror to their value in society. So if we're so kind and compassionate with those that we love, why are we so harsh and critical with ourselves? Hi, I'm Sonia. I'm a fourth generation intuitive, and I teach you how to plug back into your innate divine self, your intuition. If you're new here, hi, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Don't forget to hit subscribe and that little bell notification because I release new videos every single week. And this week we are talking about self-compassion. I know that this has been a journey that I have been on throughout my lifetime because, we have our ego intellect. This is the part that helps us to organize the world around us. It's incredibly critical, thinks in black, white, right, wrong, good, bad, and pulls from the past to project into the future. And the thing about the ego intellect is it often tries to protect us from danger. And that danger, whether real or imagined, often has us turn that lens of self-criticism as a way to motivate ourselves, as a way to protect us from making mistakes, as a way to even have us be responsible in life. The inner critic likes to believe that perfection is possible and that it knows what a good person is, so that when we fall short of those expectations, that it is somehow a failure of ours. But when we start to use the ego intellect as a way and a motivation for our self-esteem, the ego intellect self-separates out. So it likes to compare people, me versus the person across the street, me versus a neighbor, a coworker, a family member. And in that social comparison, that's where it often boosts its self-esteem, but it's kind of like a sugar high. It's really transient, it's very short-lived. And when we use that sense of comparison as a way to find our self-value, it's kind of like building your foundation on quicksand. Because at one moment, you could be doing a really good job, and the next, all of a sudden, you are not only culpable and responsible, but are really worthy of this harshness. I know that in my own life and in my own personal and interpersonal growth, self-compassion has been a real practice for me. I have found that my ego intellect, and a really simple tool that we can start to do is name our ego intellect. In my family, we like to say it's your barking dog. So we can think of your pet, you train your pet, you don't shoot your pet. That ego intellect, that little self-critic, again, is not you. It's a part of you that's protecting you from danger. So if you can identify that voice, even noticing how it feels in your body. When my little inner critic gets very loud, I can tell immediately. My jaw gets tight, my shoulders get clenched, my shoulders, everything just tightens up like I'm wearing a pair of pants that are too tight. And it's often trying to motivate me. And that place of motivation, if I'm really, really hard on myself, then I will get things done. But in reality, that's not a good motivator, because when we motivate ourselves through shame, what happens is we end up suffering from burnout. It's kind of like what we get is compliance in the short term, but in the long term, not only does it demotivate us, but it disconnects us from our power, from our gifts, from who it is that we are. And that naturally open-hearted space of also recognizing that, like, you're a human being, I'm a human being, we make mistakes, and that's part of our learning experience. Like I was saying, on my own self-compassion experience, I have found that a lot of empaths are very good at being compassionate with others. We can be so nurturing, give all the space in the world, but for ourselves, that same space doesn't exist. And when we have this practice, first of just noticing that inner critic that's trying to help us from danger, whether it's failure, whether it's rejection, whether it's motivation, if we can start to pay attention to the languaging, how it feels, that gives us a little bit of choice and pause. For me, it's like I'll notice all of a sudden that I'm in my head, that I'm being extraordinarily self-critical, and that this is a flag and an invitation to practice self-love and self-compassion. So the first exercise that we can do is first, even just in paying attention to the chatter, where does that come from? I'm trying to motivate myself. What is my ego intellect trying to criticize, and what does it want to change? Oh, it's trying to motivate us for some sort of change. And then second, take a moment and then get in touch with the emotion underneath it. How does that feel? Where is that emotional pain from? Maybe if you're suffering from, being critical of your body and shaming yourself in the places of how you feed and sustain yourself, that is a wound around not feeling good enough, not feeling lovable enough, not feeling worthy enough. And if we can think about how we would talk to a friend and somebody that we love, using that same language connected to our spirit and our heart space. My favorite tool always, one hand on your heart, one hand on your belly, anchoring into the energy of your spirit, and then even starting by practicing saying those things to ourselves. May I be loving and patient with my humanness. May I be accepting and loving of my body. That is, home number one for our spirit, And then when we can also think in another way as a way of self-knowledge, what do I need to hear to express that kindness? Often what I can pay attention to when my ego intellect gets really loud and my self-criticism gets really loud is even as simple as, you're doing a beautiful job and I'm really proud of you. It's enough. And this then pays attention, first acknowledging the danger of that our ego intellect is trying to tell us. And instead of trying to shush it or overcome it, using a different language and saying, thank you so much for trying to help me, but I'm going to use a different approach. When we can acknowledge the messaging that we are getting, but instead of listen to it as a direct reflection, but just often crunchy language, that then we can start to practice these new ways of being, having a loving kindness practice. Another simple tool that I use and teach my clients is, if you're really struggling with self-compassion, first to think of somebody that you love, whether it be a family member, a child, a friend, thinking of somebody who you just love so wholly. Often it can be really easy for them to open and connect to our heart space, think about just their gifts, just that magic, just that essence, and that love that then pours out of us. And even in this meditative space of just first connecting with their energy, then starting to pour that energy into ourselves, pouring that love and attention and kindness and softness that comes from our spirit and our higher selves back into ourselves. A beautiful way that I also love to anchor in this practice is by giving myself a hug. So first connecting with somebody else's energy, then connecting with my own, and embracing all of my human parts, and then literally wrapping my arms around myself and really focusing on giving that energy to my heart space. This is a very powerful practice, and it helps to train that critic to be in service to our intuition, to our highest selves. And when we realize that what we think is good motivation is often just shame that says I am bad isn't a good way of being. I think of a client that I had spoken to earlier this week. She's very creative, sensitive, very powerful, executive businesswoman. And she had found in some of these different relationships with her partner that she was in a place of overgiving. And she knew this. And all of a sudden she got into a lot of story about why it was the way that she was, how she needed to try harder, what it was that she just needed to do. That was not only robbing her of her different successes, but really using this energy as a way to hurt herself into change. And starting to have some of these practices and recognizing that this comes from a source of pain, and that pain means that it's a pause. So start to talk to yourself like you are your own best friend. When you recognize that tightness, when you recognize that critic, recognize that like I said, it's not sustainable. And even if you want to be a giver, in order of having these self-compassion practices helps us sustain burnout in all places of our life. It's a little shift, but it's monumental. So I would love to know, what are your self-compassion practices that you would have in your life? For me, one that I've mentioned many times, I like to write 3 things that I love about myself, 3 things that I'm grateful for, 3 things that I'm proud of as part of my morning practice that helps to anchor into myself and helps to clear that perspective. Like I also said, when I can find that I'm struggling, practicing the pause and thinking about what kindness do I need to give myself in this moment, and then doing that. Thinking about how I am nurturing and loving with others, and how can I pay attention to that energy and give it back to myself. These simple ways will create a radical shift in your life. So practice self-compassion. It's a game changer. So I hope you enjoyed this video this week. I will be back next week. Definitely check out my site, soniatully.com. I do intuitive readings, mentoring, all sorts of different things. Check out my family podcast. I love to hear from you. So I hope you're having a beautiful day, and I'll see you next week. Bye.